Everyone, and welcome to our training on understanding and responding to child sexual abuse. I'm Megan O'Neill, and I'm the school counselor at Dora L. Small School.
And I'm Melissa Spence, and I'm at Dyer.
I'm Christine Stoltz, one of the school counselors at Memorial Middle School.
Okay, so our objectives for you today include helping you to understand the law better. We'll describe or provide a description of the model policy for the district. We'll provide a definition and potential indicators or warning signs of child sexual abuse. We'll help to clarify district-wide reporting expectations and hopefully reduce some of the anxiety associated with reporting, especially in regard to child sexual abuse. We talk about student education today, which is primarily done by your school counselors in the lower grades and by the nurses and health teacher in the higher grades. And we will also talk about various sources of support for families and students and staff.
The goals for this training for school personnel are to increase your awareness of developmentally appropriate and inappropriate sexual behaviors in children, to increase your ability to recognize indicators of child sexual abuse. We want to enhance your ability to respond effectively when a student or student's friend or peer discloses sexual activity to a staff member. We want to increase your awareness of local resources available to students, parents, schools, community members, and how these resources may be accessed. This training is also going to address confidentiality and disclosure concerns that go beyond being a mandated reporter.
So we definitely know this is a heavy subject, and we want to encourage you to take care of yourselves today. If you feel the need to step away, please do so. We do have some space in the guidance department. Most of you may be aware it's over just before you get to the main office to the left of the stairwell, and we certainly do have male or female staff available if you do need any support. So we do trust that you know yourselves and to take the care that you need. And if you do find this material difficult at all, there's school counselors in all the schools, so feel free to reach out to us if that's needed.
Here's an overview of the law. This is our DOE's model policy for child sexual abuse prevention and response. The Maine legislature requires schools to implement a policy to address the prevention, response, and reporting of child sexual abuse within the school setting. The Board of South Portland is committed to implementing best practices to prevent and respond to child sexual abuse and to ensure that all children attend a school which is a safe and secure learning environment.
Questions that we're going to answer for you today kind of relate to the questions in the clouds here. So we're going to be answering through this training today, what is child sexual abuse?
Who is sexually abused?
How often does child sexual abuse happen?
Who are the abusers?
Why don't victims always tell?
How will I know if it's happening?
What are some of the effects of child sexual abuse?
How do I report abuse, and what if I'm not sure if it's really happening?
And as well as, what should I do if a child tells me they're being abused, and how do I get help for the child?
So the definitions that we want to make sure that you are aware of is what is child sexual abuse. So child sexual abuse is any sexual engagement through hands-on or even hands-off activities between an adult and a child or adolescent. It is an exploitation of power and trust, and it's definitely illegal. For sexual engagement, it's considered sexual abuse when there is a significant age difference between the children, or if the children are very different in development, size, or some other power differential.
Who is sexually abused? Children from all genders can be sexually abused. The vast majority of child sexual abuse is never reported. Research shows that children rarely make up these accusations of sexual abuse, and research shows that if a child knows accurate terms for body parts, such as vagina and penis, then they are less likely to become victims.
Some of the information you hear this morning is going to be repetitive, and that is because it's important information, and we're hoping some of this stuff sticks. So how often does child sexual abuse occur? So in terms of frequency, I'm going to read through this because this is important information for us to hear. Because as Megan mentioned, sexual abuse for children or to children occurs more often than we think. So about 1 in 5 children identifying as female and 1 in 20 children identifying as male experience child sexual abuse. In Maine, about 7% of high school students, that's 10% of children identifying as female, and 4.1% of children identifying as male, report they've been forced to have sex. In Maine, 10 to 15% of children identifying as female, and 5% of children identifying as male, report they've been forced to have sexual contact of some kind. There are many other kinds of sexual abuse that don't include physical contact, and sexual abuse, as Megan mentioned, is one of the most underreported crimes in the country, so the number of victims are much higher than reports to law enforcement may tell us. Half of all of the calls to Maine Sexual Assault Crisis and Support Line are from or about people under the age of 18.
Child victims often know the perpetrator. So among cases of child sexual abuse reported to law enforcement, 7% of them are strangers.
So in the following slides, we want to make sure that you understand the development. So what we will be discussing is what is developmentally expected for typical behaviors and what are problematic behaviors, sexual behaviors, and those who come in the form of atypical.
So we understand as well that we're going to be talking about some development of children who are younger than the age group that you typically deal with. But because all of these children that you work with also have siblings that you will see as well, it's good to know the information across all of the ages.
So here are some examples of typical and atypical development for infancy from 0 to 2 years old. So typical behaviors are exploring their whole body, including exploring their genitals, touching genitals for pleasure with hand or objects, which is masturbation, having a physical response to stimulation, really enjoying being naked, touching mother's or other's breast, and asking questions, if verbal, about their own and others' bodies and bodily function. So those atypical behaviors is any unusual knowledge or demonstration of sexualized behaviors.
Again, we realize we're doing a lot of reading to you from the slides, but we want this information to kind of sink in. In early childhood, that's ages 3 to 5, you can see that the list of atypical behaviors has increased with age, and not all behaviors on their own seem to be indicative of sexual abuse. So I'm going to go through the typical behaviors and then the atypical behaviors. The typical behaviors include touching genitals for pleasure, sometimes in the presence of other people, mimicking dating behavior, such as kissing or holding hands, excessive talk of private body parts, exploring private body parts with same-age children, known as playing doctor to many of us, asking questions about where babies come from and how they're born, and attempting to see others naked, undressing, or using the toilet. These atypical behaviors may include knowing about sex acts that are out of the ordinary or unexpected for their age, oral contact, saying, drawing, or doing anything sexual toward people, animals, or things, masturbating until they are hurt, many times a day, or using items or thrusting, problems with sleep, self-harm, fear of certain adults, or not wanting to be alone. Keep in mind again that these atypical behaviors do not usually occur in isolation in regard to child sexual abuse. Typically, children who have been sexually abused are more likely to demonstrate more than one atypical behavior, because you may see sometimes with children problems with sleep as part of their natural development, but when you factor in some of these other concerns, that's what you want to be looking for. But that awareness needs to be there as well.
So for typical behaviors in elementary development for ages 6 and above, you may see touching genitals for pleasure, usually in private, playing games with children, and that might look like playing family or boyfriend-girlfriend, attempting to see other people naked or undressing, and standing or sitting too close to someone. Atypical behaviors in this age group consist of early sexual activities with peers, frequent sexual activities, problems with eating, committing unlawful, dangerous, risky acts, not responding to limits, running away, substance use, and self-destructive activities. As you see, some of these listed here are things that we see for other things. So we don't want you to jump to the conclusion that, oh, that child must be being sexually abused, but we definitely want you to know that these are red flags. And if you are concerned that something like this is happening, to report it to the school counselor or an administrator, and we will address it.
So we're getting closer to your wheelhouse of student age. Typical and atypical behaviors for middle development is consistent with Christine's list for children ages 6 and up, but you have higher intensity and frequency at this point. So some typical behaviors include purposefully touching private body parts, known as masturbation, usually in private, playing games with children their own age that involve sexual behavior.
So again, as we mentioned before, that was boyfriend-girlfriend, but now it's going to increase to something like truth or dare.
Attempting to see other people naked or undressing.
So we consider that voyeuristic type behaviors, and that just means gaining sexual pleasure from watching others when they are undressing or engaged in a sexual act.
Looking at pictures of naked or partially naked people.
So with that, we tend to see and hear about kids asking for nudes or sending nude pictures of themselves as well.
Viewing or listening to sexual content in the media. Wanting more privacy and being reluctant to talk to adults about sexual issues. And beginnings of sexual attraction or interest to others.
So it should be noted that at this age, sexual experimentation between adolescents of the same age and gender is really common, and the first sexual intercourse experience happens at this age.
Atypical behaviors, again, all the same as for children ages 6 and up with higher intensity and frequency. So you may still see problems with eating, but more. Committing unlawful, dangerous or risky acts. Not responding to limits, running away, substance abuse or substance use, and self-destructive activities.
Typical high school behaviors are very similar to what Melissa and Christine had just explained. So purposely touching private parts, masturbation, usually in private, playing games with children their own age that involve sexual behavior, attempting to see other people naked or undressing, looking at pictures of naked or partially naked people, viewing, listening to sexual content in media, wanting more privacy and being reluctant to talk to adults about sexual issues, and beginnings of sexual attraction to or interest in others. So the differences between middle and high school development occur mostly in the atypical behaviors, which are repeated display of sexual body parts in public, excessive preoccupation with sexual words, sexual body parts, and sexual activities, doing sexual things with much younger children or children who are emotionally or socially at a much younger stage of development, and pressuring or forcing others into sexual activity of any kind.
So responding to sexual behaviors, we want to model communication and empathy and promote accountability. So an example of how we might do that, if we're seeing these things in the hallways, using the examples up on this slide, I'm going to use a scenario and reference a student who, in what we might consider a bag tagging situation. I see you attempting to hit your friend in the scrotum. It makes me feel uncomfortable that you're trying to hit him there. It hurts and it's not okay. And your friend asked you to stop hitting him there. So instead of using idioms or nicknames, use the correct terms as we mentioned earlier, so that everyone is clear on what is happening. And yes, it definitely reduces victimization, but it's certainly, if you can name the words, it will stop people from engaging in that, and it will, they're less likely to perpetrate on anyone who knows the terms.
So here are some tips for responding to sexual behaviors, and that's either heard or observed. We want you to stay calm, don't ignore the behavior, avoid shaming, avoid probing questions. It is absolutely not our role to investigate a possible child sexual abuse scenario, and we can actually do damage if we ask too many questions, and we can hinder the impeding investigation or any future investigations. Redirecting behavior when appropriate, so no means no, and ask the person to stop when the other person has already asked you to stop.
So what can we do to help our students and their families? There's a lot we can do. We can first educate students, and we do that through your school counselors in the younger grades or in the lower grades, through your nurses, and through our health teachers every year. And it's a scaffolded approach, so they learn more and more each year. We can talk to families and support them. Very importantly, we can respond to disclosures that are made. Although it can appear daunting, responding to any disclosure is important. Children trust you with that information, and they have shared it with you for a reason. So, responding to those disclosures. Making reports. We are all in this room mandated reporters. Because we work with children, we are mandated reporters. So, if you need help making a report, you can consult with your school counselor or your administrator. Understanding the impact of trauma on students and on their families is helpful. Our district policy states that the first person to hear a disclosure makes the report to the Department of Health and Human Services and or the district attorney or police. If a staff member hears a disclosure, please consult with your administrator or your school counselor, and either your administrator or your school counselor can sit with you while you make that report. And when you call and provide the written report, you can, to know what your local sexual assault support services are, we'll go over those as well. And we'll give you more information about all of this.
Personal safety is taught throughout all grade levels. Here are just some examples of what we do at the elementary level. So the school counselors teach a no-go-tell curriculum, which uses accurate body parts such as penis and vagina, and we use these terms to help students and staff feeling more comfortable to use these terms. We also discuss bullying prevention, peer refusal skills. Our puberty curriculum is only taught to 5th graders, and stranger awareness is also included in our No-Go Tell curriculum.
At the middle school level, our health teacher shares all of the content for sexual prevention or sexual abuse prevention. In grade 6, it's covered through healthy relationships, consent, communication, gender, and you'll see in each section of the middle school level that we have a SARSM representative come in, which is from the Sexual Assault Response Services of Southern Maine. At 7th grade, they cover, again, consent and communication, healthy relationships such as identifying red flags or use of caution in relationships, and green flags, which is considered relationship goals. Sexing online communication is also covered, and again, boundaries and a representative from SARSM comes in. For 8th grade, sexting and consent communication is covered, STDs, safe sexual intercourse, sexual abuse harassment, and again, another presentation from SARSM.
The education for high school students is done primarily through the health class. They have a mental health unit that covers neglect and all types of abuse that includes physical, verbal, and sexual, as well as risk factors for teen suicide. Those lessons are done in conjunction with the school social worker and resource officer. Guest speakers come in to speak with students from agencies such as Through These Doors, the Young Adult Abuse Prevention Program, and SARSism comes back in the high school to discuss various types of abuse, consent, assault, harassment, and incest and molestation. Substance abuse units to demonstrate links between substance use and sexual assault. And then they also had a Safe Bay Before Anyone Else Summit at SMCC, where students received more information regarding consent and participated in a discussion with speakers about issues ranging from dating to child abuse. At this time, that's not an annual event, but it did happen before. Hopefully it will happen again. Okay, so response and referral system. Who's required to make reports? As I mentioned before, we all are. All school personnel is considered mandated reporters. Anytime what gets reported, anytime abuse or neglect is known or suspected. So that includes threats to a child's health or welfare by physical, mental or emotional injury or impairment, sexual abuse or exploitation, deprivation of essential needs or lack of protection from these. As a side note, we will be following up this training with an email with the District Department of Health and Human Services reporting form, along with other resources attached.
So how do I make a report? Anytime you do hear concerns or suspicion, we encourage you to let your administrator know first that you are concerned and that you think a report is warranted. You are required to initially report that to the Maine DHHS or the district attorney. You will do that typically over the phone first and then follow up with a written form which we will provide to you. And then we have the hotline number, which is the reporting line, and it connects you right to the local office that is just down the road from us here in South Portland, and that number is 1-800-452-1999. All of us school counselors have that in our office, so if you are unsure what the number is, just ask us and we will make sure you get it. Or we will do it with you, like we said.
How soon should you make the report? Immediately. All reports must be made immediately and followed up in writing within 48 hours on request. All reports must be sent to the superintendent, and every report is documented. However, not all reports are assigned to a caseworker for investigation through DHS.
Some things to keep in mind when you are making a report. State the facts rather than making personal assessments or conclusions. Don't use "I think" or other assumptive statements. Your written documentation should be strictly limited and only include required information. You can share additional information when you make the phone call over the phone. To maintain confidentiality, individuals should not discuss their concerns with anyone other than their school counselor, social worker, or administrator in order to protect the student and their family's confidentiality. Again, we cannot stress enough that if you do suspect child sexual abuse or other forms of abuse to children in your school, please consult with the school counselor in your building.
So what if you were to suspect an adult of child sexual abuse? This isn't like an adult that has had an experience themselves with child sexual abuse, but it's someone that we might suspect is doing the perpetrating. So the inappropriate behaviors that one might see consist of overly protecting the child, being overly protective, refusing to allow for the child to participate in social activities, maybe being jealous of the child's friends or activities, accusing the child of promiscuity, distrusting the child, having their own marital problems happening, need to be in control or has fear of losing control, maybe domineering or rigid of authoritarian, favoring a special child, having been abused themselves sexually, and excessive gifting. So how would we encourage you to refer or intervene? We do not encourage you to intervene at all. That will put you at risk, that will put the child at risk. We really encourage you to just refer your observations, your concerns to your administrator and decide what to do from there.
We understand that we've given you a lot of information in a brief amount of time, so we realize you may have additional questions or concerns. If that is the case, please feel free to email any of us at the information that we've provided on the slide. We will be providing this additional information in a follow-up email as well. Please take care of yourselves. We know that this information is heavy, but it's very important to protect our students. So we got this done really quickly, so you're welcome. So now you guys have some time. So thank you all for your time. We appreciate it.